Hello, everyone. I'm Isabelle Twipelot, the Executive Director of the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network. It's a pleasure to be here for this, I think, historical event, right, with Vietnamese and for these very special publications and, beginning of a series with Texas Tech University Press that we'll discuss. So I just want to tell you a few words about DVANs. Some of you have been coming here every month. So you've read the missions. So we're really about promoting, supporting, amplifying the diasporic Vietnamese literature, globally, right? This is really our missions. And how do we do this, right? We empowered, we engage, we educate, we work with the writers. We ask, what do writers need? They need community, they need workshops, they need residency, they need support to be advocated for with publications and press. They need to have events. They just need mentorships. So with DVAN, we provide that. And in addition to this, we want to build communities, right, by having the story told by the writer, presenting the stories, and have the writers read from their work in public, in events like such as this. We want to build community, have people discuss, exchange ideas, and maybe in the process heal a little bit, or grow, or have joy, right? And then, another things we do is we really about educations and making change in a society, right? It's like a lot of hate against Asians, and by promoting the story, we really believe we can show the diversity and complexity and make a difference. So this is really an advocacy also by having our stories out. And finally, we want to have the next generation, a platform for the next generations to be proud to be Vietnamese, right? They can relate and know what it means to be Vietnamese Americans globally. So this is ambitious, but this is really what it's about. And we're going to do this until there is fair representations of our voice out there, right? So it's happy to be here. I don't come on stage very often, but I'm really happy to be here today. I'm going to now to say about ÁCCENTED, these shows. As you know, this came about because of COVID, right? So we had a lot of events, we had to cancel them. And Viet Nguyen, you all know him, he just stay on the ground with us to use his platform, right? This stardom now to uplift of the writers and cultural producers from the Southeast Asian communities, right? So this is what ÁCCENTED is about. And this is by showing up, by being here with us today, you really working with us for this common goal, right? To uplift, to make visible, our perspective and stories and imaginaries. So now, I'm going to stop here, and I'm just going to say a few words about Viet Nguyen. You all know him for the sympathizers, right? Because he received the Pulitzer Prize 2017, I believe, right, for fictions. But not only Viet had, his Pulitzer Prize winners, is also, he wrote the following up, the sequence of the sympathizer with the committed, right, is also getting so much attention. You should read it. And the refugee collection of short stories and Sharon's book, right, with the Chicken of the Sea with his son. And I don't know if all of you know that, but yes, he's also an academic, not only pushed by himself, the boundaries of Vietnamese-American literature with his success, uplifting everybody by being here with us, but it's also a very amazing academic that also push the boundaries of Asian American studies and American studies, or English, literature, with his book Race and Resistance and Nothing Ever Dies. And of course, he has plenty of essays and peer-reviewed journals. So, it's amazing for a community to have somebody like Viet. So thank you, Viet, for being here with us and staying, as I said, on the ground with us and through DVAN. So all yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Isabel. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. We've known each other for a very, very long time. And when we knew each other,
how many years?
Yeah, well, when we knew each other, it was like my early 20s. And I thought, man, these people who are like in their 40s, they're so old. And now I realize I'm actually beyond the 40s. I'm not going to say anything about you. I'm beyond the 40s. I'm really, really old. When we started the progenitor or the predecessor to Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network, the name was in Vietnamese Mc the Mao, ink and blood. Very melodramatic. I thought it was very Vietnamese, but it connoted the intense passion that we had for writing, that ink and blood were the same thing. They both involved sacrifice. And I think now, many decades later, we've starting to see those more youthful visions realized with this new series from Texas Tech University Press in collaboration with DVAN. We're actually publishing our own books now and bringing out new authors of Vietnamese ancestry. And here to celebrate the beginning of this series are Travis Snyder of Texas Tech University Press and our very own Katherina Nguyen. So Travis, this is really cool. Travis is the acquisitions editor at Texas Tech University Press, working on scholarly and literary genres. And what's cool is he has a PhD in 20th century American literature and postmodern theory. I have one too, so I feel an affinity with Travis. He's taught at Trinity University and the University of Texas at San Antonio. Katherina Nguyen is a creative technologist building ways to better connect with the past and future. She has a decade of experience designing high-impact systems for organizations like Harvard Kennedy School and Google, and currently works on AI, I think that's artificial intelligence, storytelling tools at Meta. With DVAN, Kat leads the Texas Tech Publishing Series and upcoming Mapping the Diaspora project. Now, Travis, where are you calling from?
I am calling from Lubbock, Texas, dusty West Texas.
I've been to Lubbock. The amazing thing about Lubbock is that the Texas Tech Vietnam War Archive is out there. I toured it, and there was one moment where the curator said, here is our safe in which we keep our guns and our porn. And I was like, I want to be in that safe, but I did not get access to that. Also, Lubbock has really cheap whiskey. And I was like, I could live here, for the price of a single in LA. I got a triple in Lubbock. Okay, Katherina, where are you calling from?
I'm currently based in Hong Kong, or I'm currently in Hong Kong, but I'm usually based in San Francisco.
That's amazing. I did not know you were in Hong Kong. I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the many locations where our visitors are calling in from. We have people, I always love this part to see where people are calling in from. Rhinebeck, New York, Montreal, Austin, Texas, Glenford, New York, Amherst, Massachusetts, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, downtown LA, Queens, New York, Palm Springs, but calling from Harlem, Texas, Texas Hill Country, Berkeley, California, Washington, DC, Maryland, Martha's Vineyard, and Saskatchewan, Canada. I might have missed a few in that case. I'm sorry. I'm calling from Pasadena, California. So welcome to all of you, Travis and Kat. Let's get into this new series from Texas Tech and Texas Tech University Press and DVAN. Kat, can you tell us about the genesis of this DVAN series and why it's important?
Sure. So as Isabel mentioned, the vision of the Texas Tech or DVAN Texas Tech series is to foster dialogue and understanding by supporting contemporary Vietnamese and Southeast Asian authors. The series is a collaboration, the first of its kind, and I think genesis that Travis and Texas Tech had been reaching out to Isabel, and I was very honored and touched when Isabel reached out to me to help lead this initiative. My dad's also a veteran, so I found that the scars from these experiences is something that was resonating in like American society as well. So the opportunity to work at Texas Tech, which is home, as you mentioned, to like the largest Vietnam War archive, is especially meaningful to help bridge these divides and to redefine a new identity, heal both communities through fresh words, fresh voices like Abigail's.
Right. And Travis, you know, I wasn't really there for the creation of this series. So can you recount for us what you thought about when you first heard about this idea from DVAN?
It's funny because actually you were, and you might not know about this. When I started this job in 2019, one of the main lists that I was sort of charged with was figuring out a way to revitalize the works that we're bringing out about the Vietnam War. And so I sat down with the curator of that archive that you visited, which is a wild place. I sat down with that person and we talked about really the stories that have been told and the stories that haven't been told. And one of the things that we really wanted to focus on was to bring out books that weren't written by white GIs. And so in that conversation, we then went out and started getting other books. If you work at an academic press, you have to put everything that you publish through peer review, which means that you have to find readers who are willing to read a whole manuscript that they're an expert on and give you their opinion of them. And so I actually reached out to you to look at a manuscript, and you may or may not remember this. And I asked just for like some readers who you thought would be good for a Vietnam memoir. And you sent me to Andrew Lamb and to Isabel. And it was when I started talking to those people and reading more and more into what DVAN did that I realized that there are people out there who are better positioned to be making these publication decisions, to be leading this series than someone like me. And so it was really from there that the conversation just sort of snowballed, and it became an obvious and clear partnership that we wanted to participate in.
Yeah, so something productive came out of me refusing to do any work. And of course, Isabel did the work, as she always does. Katherina, you know, for a lot of prospective authors, there's a lot of mystery around how books get published, especially the whole public, you know, the submission process and what the editors do and so on. So can you tell us how DVAN gets submissions for this new series and what the editorial process is for deciding which manuscripts get selected for publication?
Sure. So we're a very young imprint, but we've been very lucky to have a lot of interest. Currently, we're open to publishing a wide range of different topics, including memoirs, poetry, anthologies, and graphic novels. We have two types of tracks currently. One is that every year we hold a call for submissions around a certain theme. And then the submissions come in, we have an internal review with Texas Tech. Then we send it out to two specially chosen reviewers as well, who choose from the finalists to become, or choose from finalists, rank their choices, and the winner becomes our call for submissions published writer. So separately, we have a special projects track where we have pitches from established writers who also go through a similarly rigorous process with our editorial board, two specialized reviewers, and then the publishing process with Texas Tech.
Great. Yeah. So as Travis said, it's a little bit different than what we would see in an independent press or a New York corporate Big Five kind of press, where we have this academic review procedure come in. And I've been someone who has been subjected to the academic review procedure at least a couple of times. And it's actually, you know, most of the time a beneficial experience, because you do have these expert opinions, hopefully expert opinions on the manuscript, hopefully being given in a spirit of generosity. And I think, you know, we in DVAN do our best to try to cultivate that spirit in our authors, our participants, and so on. But, you know, this goes back to you, Travis. I mean, we have seen in the publishing world incidents where arguably it would have been beneficial if non-academic presses had actually had a review process and could have avoided certain kinds of issues that came up later, like questions of authenticity or plagiarism and things like this. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, but also, I mean, what as the editor, what kind of vision or ethos are you bringing to this editorial process once you receive something, for example, like Abigail's manuscript?
Yeah, I'll come at the second thing by way of the first thing, which is to say that I think that one of the other big advantages of working in an academic press are the financial obligations that you're under are different than you are at a commercial press. At a commercial press, usually you're dealing in books where you need to make a certain amount of money to make the publisher happy. And the big difference is that our obligation really is not to make money. It's just to find voices that ought to be put into the public consciousness. So we're a nonprofit, as anyone would be who's affiliated with a university. So our obligations are not to only take on works that seem commercially viable or seem like you could project earnings from them. And so because of that, we're actually really well positioned to kind of scoop up books that the marketplace or the people who pull those strings are making those decisions. So we have more flexibility, we can take more chances, we can be a little bit more nimble with what we do because we're a nonprofit, because we're not needing to just take on the things that hit the hot topics. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you mentioned that my background is in academia, and bringing that to a job where it falls on me to jump into manuscripts and try to improve them. I had thought that my academic background would be incredibly useful because, I'm used to writing 40-page articles about like a weird comma in a DeLillo novel. And I think that was sort of like the bread and butter thing that academics are paid to do. And I think that really what ended up coming out of being an academic and working in publishing is that the thing that you know how to do is read attentively. It's to read and to think about it, to imagine what threads ought to be pulled, to look at which details ought to be sussed out in a different way. And so it wasn't so much the sheer sort of the pure academic side of what I had done previously. It was just the simple fact that because I'd spent all this time in school and I had become a practiced reader. And so I think that for me as an editor, when I'm working with a book like Abigail's, it's not a question of trying to browbeat it or trying to reshape it. It's a question of what does it mean to read it really deeply and to identify what makes it work, and then to figure out which of those variables ought to be accentuated or deaccentuated to make that happen in a more pristine way. So I think coming at it from academia and having fewer commercial pressures and being given the time and space to work on something just leads to more attentive reading. And it means that I think Abigail and I had a more pleasant collegial experience working through a book. And it's not always that way with editors. I don't know your experiences, but sometimes there are pretty serious disagreements about how things ought to be.
I was rejected by 13 out of 14 publishers, so I have no hard feelings towards editors.
Yeah.
But one thing I want to announce before we moved to Abbigail Rosewood is that along with this new series through Texas Tech University Press, DVAN has another collaboration with the Malay residency. I don't know how many of you have heard of this, but the Malay art colony is a major residency in the Northeast. I forget which state it's in, but it's named after the poet Edna St. Vincent Millay. And they reached out to us and we have agreed to engage in a collaborative relationship with them where we'll be able to offer a residency at the Malay Arts Colony for the first time this October for 4 weeks for 1 or 2 writers, and then 4 weeks for 6 to 7 writers next year. So I think all expenses will be covered except, unfortunately, transportation. But this is really sort of a landmark kind of event for us, and hopefully for Malay too, where of course we'll be committed to bringing writers of diverse backgrounds to the Malay Arts Colony. And I've been through residency experiences. They're usually pretty fantastic. So keep your eye out for that. Keep your eye out also for the submissions opportunities from Texas Tech University Press. I've asked our DVAN staff to put a link onto that in the chat. And now I want to bring onto stage the author of the hour, Abbigail Nguyen Rosewood. Yay! Welcome. Come back. We're gonna do Katherina, come back. We're gonna do a little toast to celebrate the first book from the DVAN Texas Tech University Press collaboration, which is Constellations of Eve by Abbigail Nguyen Rosewood. Not her first book, but her second book, but we're still thrilled to have it. It is sort of an accented custom that we have a little toast. You can, if out there in the audience, I hope you have something not alcoholic or non-alcoholic, but this is my vodka martini with anchovy stuffed olives. Congratulations, Abbigail. And I hope the best for Constellations of Eve.
Thank you so much, Viet.
All right. Okay. So I really enjoyed reading Constellations of Eve. I'm always super thrilled to welcome new writers, but especially new writers of Vietnamese descent into the literary world, Abbigail. And you have a slightly different background than a lot of writers who have been published as Vietnamese-American writers, and we'll get to this whole issue of being Vietnamese and Vietnamese-American and so on, but you came as an immigrant, not a refugee, to the United States at age 12. Can you tell us what that experience was like?
It was it was an interesting experience. I came from Vietnam to Singapore and then to Texas. So perhaps it was a shock, but I think thankfully, fortunately, being a teenager, you're kind of used to shocks. So I think my transition to the United States, it actually was a welcomed one. Yeah.
Okay, it was a welcome one. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I think, honestly, truly, it was personal. I had been separated from my mother for, I think, several years before that. And going to the United States was sort of the only possibility that could reunite us. And so it was, a safe haven in that sense. And I haven't lived with her for, I think, about 5 years prior to landing in Texas. And so it was, it was like having a family again, essentially.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, unfortunately, these stories of separation are simply way too common in the Vietnamese diaspora, whether because of war and refugee experience or your particular circumstances as an immigrant. I came when I was 4 years old, so I basically grew up as an American. But coming at 12, I think you must have carried with you a lot of memories of Vietnam and what life was like there. And then you're introduced to the United States, obviously a very different kind of a place. And I'm wondering, when it comes to these issues of identities, labels, categories, which exist in Vietnam, but exist, a little bit differently here in the United States. How do you relate to these kinds of identities, labels, and categories that are here in the United States, racial, ethnic, or otherwise?
I think recently I've been thinking of myself as having 3 identities, which is one is a Vietnamese one is a Vietnamese-American, second is a Vietnamese-American one, and one is an American one. And I think that I balance all 3 of these identities, and there are so many nuances between them that I'm not sure that people know about. Like what does it mean? How do I often think about exhibiting identity, for example, and to what extent is it, or am I performing myself? Like, to what extent am I performing my Vietnamese identity or my American one? And a lot of times it's a struggle, but it also it is something that I think about every day. That it applies to my life every day.
So give me an example of performing your Vietnamese identity.
So I think that when I'm in the US, I'm more deliberate about performance, because I know that I have to keep up a certain part of myself to not completely lose touch with my lineage. for example, it's more important for me here to, have a statue of Buddha and have a place to pray to my father. Whereas if I were in Vietnam, I don't think I would be so deliberate with those actions. I would have a temple to go to, which is where my father's urn is. But in the United States, I feel like I surround myself with objects. And so objects become replacement for identities. Or I dress myself in a certain way that remind me, or that maybe accentuate certain identities. Yeah.
By the way, I just want to remind the audience, you can ask questions of Abbigail, Travis, or Katherina in the chat. There'll be a Q&A period from the audience as well. And so what about the American identity? When do you perform that? I'm curious what those are.
I think
American identity are.
I think it particularly, I mean, when it comes to writing anyway, I've thought a lot about what does it mean to be, an Eastern and a Western writer. And because I'm trained in the US as a writer, but I have my influences is also from the East. And even though Vietnamese people are very outspoken, I think Vietnamese literature in Vietnam that I have read is actually very quiet and very subtle. And it's almost like everything is a micro expression. A text, a novel is an accoutrement of micro expressions that you don't have to then decipher. Whereas in American contemporary literature, I think there's more passion and outward expression of passion and rage, and I love both of those things. So I am in between, the quiet rage and the expressive and loud one.
So, I think of myself as a Vietnamese-American writer, Asian-American writer, American writer, or just writer, right? But I know that you have said that you are a Vietnamese writer and an American writer. I would never call myself a Vietnamese writer because I can't write in Vietnamese. I left when I was 4 and so on. So I'm interested in that, like this claim to being a Vietnamese writer as well. What does that mean for you to say that you are a Vietnamese writer if you're writing in English, as your 2 novels have been written, as far as I understand? You don't write in Vietnamese, is that?
Yeah, that's correct. I think it's such a part of my DNA and my voice as a writer. So I think when I say that I'm a Vietnamese writer, is that my inspiration and my sensibility, I think, is rooted in my upbringing, like with this novel. I think that I'm always sort of leaning, to my Vietnamese identity in that sense. But I don't currently, I cannot currently write in Vietnamese, but I do hope that I could one day. I know Jhumpa Lahiri just recently came out with her first Italian novel, where she wrote entirely in Italian after having lived there for about a decade. And that's what I hope that I will be able to do as well one day, but in Vietnamese. Maybe, and I look forward to, in a way, simplifying language, because when you're kind of relearning to express yourself in a language, maybe it just boils down to the essence.
When we think about some of the famous migrant writers who wrote in other languages, it's usually that they wrote in languages besides their language of origin, like Joseph Conrad going from Polish to English, or Vladimir Nabokov going from Russian to English. I'm trying to think of writers who go back to the original language, originary language, which would be what we're talking about here, writing in Vietnamese. I mean, I thought about it too, and I thought, too much work for me personally. So I think it's fantastic that that's going to be that is one of your ambitions. Now, you're being published, or this novel is being published in a series about Vietnamese-American or Vietnamese diasporic literature. And, I mean, most of Vietnamese-American literature until recently has been shaped by war and by the refugee experience, which is not what characterizes Constellations of Eve, and we'll get to that novel specifically. But do you see yourself as a part of Vietnamese-American literature? You can say no, right? But do you see yourself?
I absolutely do. Yeah, absolutely, and strongly. Because I think that I am a part of perhaps a new wave of Vietnamese-American literature that isn't necessarily about the war, and I think that that I feel especially grateful to you and Isabel and DVAN for this initiative, because I think it's an example of the kind of gifts that keep on giving. Like you got the gifts, right, as like the writer, and then you were gifted the Pulitzer, but it didn't just end there. It just put out so many other branches. And so for that, I'm really grateful. And I think Vietnamese American literature has many branches, infinite amount of branches, and I'm really happy to be one of the tiny shoot on the branch.
Saying that I hope that Vietnamese Americans don't keep writing about war and the refugee experience. Not that we need to stop, but those aren't the only things that concern us. But the problem with my generation, or a lot of people of my generation, the old folks and people older than me, is that it's really hard for us to stop thinking about war and the refugee experience, because those were very fundamental to shaping who we were. That doesn't mean that that everybody else has to write about these things. And so one of the great things about Constellations of Eve is that I never could have imagined a novel like this. It's completely unexpected, and that's, like as you're saying, that's fantastic. It's fantastic that someone of your background is writing something that is Vietnamese American simply by definition of you being Vietnamese American, but whose content, as far as I can tell, has very little to do both with conventional Vietnamese American things, but certainly the war and the refugee experience too. Now, another unexpected thing that you wrote recently was this essay for Time magazine. And I hope one of the DVAN people, staff members, can find this article. It's Time magazine. It's under Abbigail's name, so it's easy to find. But in this Time magazine essay, published not too long ago, you wrote about how you were leaving the United States and going back to Vietnam. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you were writing about?
Sure. So I wrote that essay while I was in Vietnam, visiting my grandmother, making the plans to transition there. And, now I'm very close. I'm 3 weeks away from my official move. And I'm very excited for that. Part of the kind of motivation for the move is, my husband and I were pregnant, and so we're and I just suddenly, I was just sitting on the couch one day and suddenly felt like that I needed to go back, and that I felt like my time was limited to people like my grandparents, those voices from their generation, their stories that I thought I had an infinite amount of time to eventually find out. I really don't, and I think I just thought, this is my last chance to do so. And I also, you said you grew up in Vietnam until age 5, right? So I'm thinking about maybe staying there for 3 years or something like that, and because I want my future child to really be immersed in that environment in ways that I cannot convey alone, that I can't teach as a mother alone here in Shandaken, upstate New York. So yeah, that's why. And I read somewhere, I think in a scientific magazine, that when you're born in a place, the isotopes of it stays in your teeth. And so there are just things that bind to your DNA that really that that really is part of you. And maybe, I guess I want my daughter to have the Vietnamese isotopes in her teeth.
Well, first of all, congratulations
Thank
on the
you.
pregnancy, obviously, and on this momentous move. I will say that, you know, I came to the United States when I was 4, and I have very, very few memories of Vietnam. But somehow just being born in the country was an enormous psychological tie for me. So it's very difficult for me to call myself 100% American or 100% Vietnamese because of that tie there to Vietnam. So I think there might be something there. I don't know if it's isotopes in as much as it is like guilt, you know, like, oh, I'm Vietnamese. Get it. So leaving at 2 or 3 may not be early enough. Maybe just a couple more years, you know, until the daughter is cognizant of certain things about Vietnamese culture and language, but it should be fun. So, you know, I've heard from other Vietnamese Americans who have gone back to Vietnam to do careers and things like that, that sometimes they say, well, their parents are kind of upset because their parents, you know, fled the country to give their children other opportunities, better lives, and so on. And now the children are going back to Vietnam. So does your mother have anything to say about this return on your part?
My mom was not, like, originally she was not supportive of it, and she was very doubtful. She just, you know, she was kind of like, oh, you know, she's saying that she will go there, but she won't actually follow through. I think it's, you know, it's bound to her. It's the story that she's telling herself about me, which is because she was a single mother in Vietnam after my father passed away. So I think that really traumatized her, and Vietnam is bound up with those memories. Like, when I'm there, she's so scared of me getting into a car accident, or she's constantly, you know, telling me to not get on a scooter. Whereas, you know, I think the amount of risk that I would take in walking down the street or the subway in New York City, there are risks there too. There's been a lot of anti-Asian violence. But yeah, I didn't have her support at first, but she has come around.
Sounds like my parents. Don't get computers, you know, don't eat the food, all this kind of stuff. Okay, I want to make sure we talk about Constellations of Eve, this new novel, which I enjoyed reading so much. I could say a lot about it, but first of all, I want to ask you to tell us, in your own words, what Constellations of Eve is about.
So Constellations of Eve follows these three main characters throughout 3 different incarnations of their life. And in each iteration, these characters have a chance to kind of do over, to try again. And they, you know, and with each reality, there's echoes of former ones. Yeah, the story is, well, yeah, that's what it's about. So I'll say that.
It's hard to describe, right? Because exactly what you're saying, that it's a novel that's partly built on repetitions and variations, and you know, it opens up, without giving too much away, with a very dramatic opening that immediately catches your attention. And then it sends us into alternate, parallel histories of these main characters. And for me, it brought up this idea that by the way, if you're not muted out there in the audience, please mute. It brought up for me this idea that, please mute. It brought up for me this idea that for many of us, you know, there's so many ways our lives could have branched in different directions based on choices we made or choices that other people made. Like, as a refugee, for example, I often think about, well, what would have happened if the US had made this decision, or if my parents had made this decision and I had stayed in Vietnam, and so on. And your novel explores that territory, obviously in a very, very different vein. And I think that, from what I can tell, you know, Buddhism, and I know that you are have Buddhist beliefs, seems to play some role in your novel, in this idea of these different possibilities and realities that our lives could take.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think the belief in Buddhism, the reincarnation belief, is a very compassionate one, because it allows us to believe that, you know, that we have a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance, because it seems to me that life is so difficult, and it's you know, people miss each other all the time, and despite our best effort to communicate, and despite how much we do love each other, and yet, you know, don't quite manage to love each other in the right way, or in the way that that the other understands. So I think that that's why I am drawn to that. And it's also, I mean, it's also personal for me. You know, I feel like I can find, you know, because I never met my father. I feel maybe it was always comforting for me as a child to feel like he's around, in different shape, you know, like in the shadow of a leaf, or, you know, whatever it is, you know. And so even that is kinder than things just being finished.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and okay, also, not to give anything away, the novel does not have anything to do, as far as I can tell, with Vietnam or Vietnamese people. Is that correct? Unless I missed something.
The characters are free of ethnic markers. Everything I write is going to have a Vietnamese backbone, whether or not I, you know, but I don't necessarily feel like I need to prescribe it to the characters, or to signal it in any way, because when I think about writing, you know, fiction that I read when I'm in Vietnam, when I'm visiting, the characters are not described as Vietnamese. I just know they are. It's the same as, you know, being in the majority in the US. So in that sense, it's still a Vietnamese book, but it's not signal as such.
I think that's a really interesting response. It raises a lot of provocative issues around, you know, what the possibilities are for writers who are marked in different ways. Like in Vietnam, you or I would be a part of the majority. Here, we're not. And you're right, obviously, in Vietnam, when we're reading Vietnamese literature, characters are not going around saying, hey, I'm Vietnamese, or hey, this is a Vietnamese cultural custom, in the same ways that white writers in this country are not saying the same things about whatever they're doing. I want to hear from you and from Constellations of Eve for a few minutes, however long you choose to read from the novel, so the audience can also hear a bit about the book, and then we'll talk a little bit more about Constellations of Eve. And let me remind the audience, please put your questions in the chat for Travis, Katherina, or Abbigail, and then we'll see what we'll talk about after the reading. Here's
Sure.
Constellations of Eve.
Before I start reading, I just also wanted to add a little bit about, you know, the issues that you kind of mentioned a little bit about publishing. And, you know, when I published with my first book with my first publisher, I actually, you know, deliberately left my middle name Nguyen as a N initial, because they are more, you know, white, basically, and non-Vietnamese. And because of that, I didn't want them to exoticize me or signal in any way. But with DVAN and TTUP, because I know I'm in a safe space and I know that I have people who advocate for me, then I would use my middle initial freely, because I know that it's not being sort of, you know, I'm not suspicious of the intention. So I just wanted to add that. But I will read. I'm gonna read the prologue. The Cart's Walls. To fling the body into an expansive blue wasn't about dispelling grief, but about preserving joy. Eve needed to jump before the upcoming minutes, days, months began the demolishing of an entire life that had been so carefully built. Every decision made to prioritize love, her family, her husband, her son, and it had yielded unspeakable rewards. When Eve looked up to check where she was, reality having left her body, she saw a bridge, as though the universe were speaking to her. She left her car keys in the ignition and climbed the stairs in a daze. Leaning over the bridge railing, Eve deliberated. She didn't want to be another survivor of grief. What for, when up till now her life had been so beautiful? Even more than this horizon of retreating sunglow, various blues gaining in space and depth, and more infinite. If she jumped now, there might be time yet for her soul to join theirs. Why allow me to know such happiness? She wondered. If happiness existed solely so that tragedy could strike more precisely. There had been many ordinary days, as all good days tended to be. Compared to their friends, they had seemed the lucky ones, the type who needed to be comforted and knew to cherish the person who brought them that comfort. For there resides in people both urges, to love those who tend to our needs and to destroy them for the same reason. It seems foolish for anyone to accept in us what we despise in ourselves, and so wiser to resent them. Yet they had been happy fools. There were things Eve and Liam had both surrendered to achieve tranquility, but it was easy to give up petty desires, dreams of the spotlight that wouldn't be possible if everything else wasn't flooded in darkness. She had been certain that they had it figured out, had understood precisely how to navigate their marriage. Perhaps it was easy to become cocksure about the rest of life when one had love. That night, she had offered to drive. Since Liam had had a few drinks, Blue was in the back seat, chirping about his friend's birthday party they had just left. As usual, her husband was the one to respond to the son's endless observations and inquiries. Eve wasn't listening. In fact, she had heard nothing. Their conversations were fading echoes, lifetimes away. She loved them the way one loved the heaven's dark descent, its stars and planets burning on their last memories of light. What a trick the sky was, for even the deepest blue wasn't black, and perhaps even the most assured happiness wasn't whole. Eve thought about other versions of themselves. In another life, another universe where the constellations were slightly off kilter, at once familiar and out of reach. She felt sure, as one was sure of hunger, that she had met and loved them in another time and space, and would continue to do so throughout all eternities. She couldn't remember exactly how the car had veered off course, as toppling through a grove of trees down a small hill. Why was it that one could never recall the exact details of the event that was the cause of one's deepest despair? And yet events don't let us go. They return again, causing us to break out in a cold sweat. When Eve woke up from the crash, she didn't need to look. One could always feel when something happened to the people one most loved, definitive and final. When all of life's meaning suddenly drained from the universe, Eve would have given everything to never have known such bliss, if it meant not having to face its annihilation. It no longer mattered if a god or a rearrangement of some invisible symmetries had simply decided that a family had completed its journey. She was ready to join them. Someone was hurrying on the bridge toward Eve, a woman. She was oddly dressed, her clothes patched in vibrant fabrics, her shoes too large for her frame, her hair full of wildflowers. Had she come to save Eve? Don't, the woman shouted, her arms reaching out. Talk to me, please. What's your name? I'm Perry. Hi, Perry, Eve said. Or perhaps she had only thought it as she was plummeting, her soul leaping ahead, crashing into a blue light calm, a windless day. On her way down, Eve pleaded to no one. Please let me try again. Let me meet them once more. Another life, another way. Eve was wrong when she thought souls were made of glass, reflective shards cutting the body and taking residence. Souls were echoes that galloped from one cosmic time to the next, bridging the past and the present, masked as déjà vus and dreams, disturbing the body and about the possibility of lives it could have had. Another room to wake up in, another pair of eyes to caress the rays of morning light, another way to rearrange life's fortunes and dodge its fatal mistakes. As many times as it takes, I will get it right. The woman gasped and ran to the spot where Eve had fallen. She looked down and took out a deck of cards from her bag. They were the only inheritance she had managed to keep. Her grandfather's reinvention of the original tarot, all meticulously hand-painted. He had been working on them for most of his life, and towards the end, the images seemed to have bled from his own mind, further and further away from the original. The cards had helped her survive on the street by bullshitting people, forcing readings, predicting futures they didn't ask for. They were her only treasure. She shuffled the deck, picked 3, and without seeing what she had drawn, she tossed them in the water after Eve. The cards fluttered around each other in a dance, in a soundless waltz. The woman breathed one last prayer for the stranger she had not managed to save. May your last wish be fulfilled. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Fantastic. If we had like a live audience you have me applauding after having consumed most of my martini. Now, that prologue to Constellations of Eve sets up what happens in the rest of the novel, because all the characters that you mentioned in this prologue will come back in a variety of different scenarios as different kinds of people, even if they carry the same name. What was the inspiration for coming up with this story?
I started writing this book kind of around the time where my relationship with my husband, who was then my fiance, was at a crossroad. And I think this book was a labor of love in many ways, because it was my way of trying to figure out our relationship, asking myself difficult questions, and really figuring out the puzzle of, how did we miss each other? How did we not communicate? How did we begin to take each other for granted?
And it's your second novel. Was it easier than the first one? Harder?
No. I don't think any writing is easy. I think it's it's weightlifting, and probably I would rather lift weight. Or weightlifting is probably easier. No, it was very difficult for me to write, and I wrote many drafts before the one that Travis ended up seeing. So it was difficult.
We have a question. Well, first of all, let me say, writing is always difficult.
Yes.
And maybe like with the second or the third book, we would think, as you were saying, compared to weightlifting, if you keep on lifting weights or doing sports, seemingly things should get easier because you get stronger or better at the sport. But the problem is the hurdles get higher, the challenges get higher, because I think hopefully we try to do more as writers and do more things that are more difficult for us. But even regardless of that, I mean, it still just basically sucks to be a writer. I'm talking to all the prospective writers out there, do anything else but be a writer. And if you can't do anything else, then you know you're a writer. We have a question from Bruce Craven from the audience. And of course, if there are other members of the audience with questions, put them in the chat. Bruce Craven asks, Abigail, you're so good at weaving together spiritual, emotional, and cinematic elements in your prose. Are there ways you get yourself to bring out such powerful sentences and content?
Thank you, Bruce. I think that I use music when I write. The opening song that you might have heard, Effuge or Effuge, was something that I play on repeat during the composition of this novel. And I in a way, I wish I hadn't chosen it for the intro, because it was a little bit of a shock to the system. I haven't heard the song in several years, and it just completely transported me again to that space that, not always pleasant to be in. But I also, I think I'm also very visual, in that I love visual arts. I love colors. One of my characters' name is Blue. Their sons. And so I don't know if it's quite intentional in terms of thematically or cinematically, but I love paintings. I definitely draw inspiration from them.
Right.
Oops.
And of course, one of the themes in the novel is painting or art. The different characters at different times are artists or photographers and so on. Delightfully disturbing, writes Betsy Shands, who I believe will be related to you in some way. Well, Betsy Shands sort of left that enigmatic and did not say why. It's delightful and disturbing, or delightful.
I'll take it.
Yes, but I will push a little bit further and say that in the first, what happens after the prologue that you read is that we get the first variation on the theme of these three characters, Eve, Liam, and Blue. And Eve is a young woman. First we see her, I think, as a college student, then as a young artist, and then she's with Liam. And she's figuring her way out in the world as an artist, as a person, as a woman. She's exploring her sexuality. And one way that your novel is different, I think, than a lot of Vietnamese literature, as far as I know Vietnamese literature, and a lot of Vietnamese-American literature, is that there's a lot of sex in Constellations of Eve, at least in this first variation in the novel. And by sex, I mean graphic sex. I mean, relatively graphic sex, okay? This would get you definitely an R rating if this was a movie. So let's talk about that, because ironically, in, let's say, Vietnamese-American literature, one category we've been discussing, you get a lot of trauma, typically around the refugee experience, war, combat, death, violence, all this kind of stuff. Not so much sex. Not so much sex. And if sex appears, as something traumatic, it's like rape, right? But not so much graphic sex. Why? I'm just curious, why you made that choice as a writer, and was it difficult to write those scenes?
I think the book just comes to me and as very centrally, and so it wasn't those scenes are, for lack of a better word, a pleasure to write. But I don't know if, I think I was interested in sex, let's say after motherhood, after pregnancy, and so there's a scene of not necessarily sex, but of Liam and Eve exploring that after her body is in a different state of trauma. So there is pain there interwoven, and I would and those are kind of the spaces that I'm most interested in as a writer, is where it titters between beauty and ugliness. So when is beauty pushed to the point where it falls over into something horrendous. And in some way, sex can be that for me.
For a lot of people.
A lot of people, yes.
Like I've written a lot about war and torture and violence, but sex, a little bit harder for me to do. Death, also potentially a disturbing theme in this novel. You know, we see some of it in the prologue, and we see more of it later on in the book. Was that hard for you to write as well? I mean, fairly dark theme.
I think because of the way that I was, you know, my origin story was all about, you know, my mom always repeated to me growing up, oh, you came to life the same time that your father passed away. It was so interwoven. This was my mythology, that life and death was, you know, just the opposite of the same coin for me. And it was, and I think, and not that she intended for me to feel that way, but there were instances where I felt guilt for being born in a way, because I have tied it somehow with my father's death. And, you know, of course, that's not the case, but I think I don't, you know, I think my editor, Travis, actually put it really well when he said that the prologue is about a death, but not a death at the same time. So a death and a non-death, because, you know, based on reincarnation, you begin again. And so it's dark, but it's hopeful.
You know, as a Catholic, you know, I agree, right? I mean, our whole Catholic mythology is built on death and resurrection, on terrible violence and sacrifice and rebirth and all of that. So I think that's all in there as well. You know, you mentioned something interesting to me, which is that with your previous novel and your first publisher, you had decided to not use your Vietnamese name in your authorial name because of your fears of being exoticized by the previous press and so on, and feeling comfortable enough to use your Vietnamese name here with us in the DVAN series. I found that really interesting. You know, it's like it sort of encapsulates the dilemma that so many Asian American writers have, and I've known plenty of writers who've struggled with the same issue that you have had for different reasons. For example, you know, adoptees who look Asian and are Asian, but they have non-Asian names. And then, of course, when they publish, it becomes an issue. Should they just use only the non-Asian names, or should they use the Asian names that they have somewhere in the past or that they've given themselves and so on? And neither answer is, I mean, both answers, I think, are situated on this fraught terrain of what Americans consider to be race and the different ways that people have come here to the United States. Did you experience that with the first novel, even with, you know, not using your Vietnamese name explicitly on there? Did you encounter some of your fears of exoticization or misunderstanding?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, because because they're like what you guys were discussing earlier in terms of an academic press and a commercial press, and what the difference is in terms of commercialization and marketing. You know, my first novel had the face of an Asian woman on it, and I really I wrote a really long email to my publisher, and I know, you know, they have precedence in using faces, so I'm not exactly blaming them for making that decision. But for me, it was still uncomfortable because I felt like it was just signaling my race for no particular reason. And even before ever getting a book accepted anywhere, I knew that I didn't want that treatment. I knew that I didn't want to be pigeonholed. And, you know, so I try to convey that as best as I could. And we had that conversation early on, you know, with Isabel. And and Travis as well. And they both understood it like so quickly. I didn't even really need to go into a long-winded explanation. And they honor that, as you can see with the cover, that it's about the story, and not about me,
Yeah, I'm trying to find the link that I can share with the audience with the cover of the book without using an Amazon link, which is the one that comes up that features the cover. But it does feature an Asian woman, I believe, in this sort of rather coy pose, in a pose that no one would usually do, because she has her arm up like that.
Right.
So it's not...
What does that mean? Like it's not expressing any particular emotion to me. So it's an attractive cover, but
with an attractive woman,
right.
Which, why that? Yeah, I empathize deeply, and I'm glad that we have not gone down that road and that you felt more comfortable with us. So potential authors, we will not exoticize you. All right. Perhaps last question from the audience before we bring back Isabel, Travis, and Katherina for some closing remarks. Again, from our friend Bruce Craven. Both Abbigail and Viet and myself have commented on the difficulty of writing, of getting a project from start to finish. Are there novels that you read when you were starting out that inspired you? I think this is for you, Abbigail. Help you fight and lead yourself forward to complete your projects and not quit.
I think everything I've ever read informed my writing, but a few that I feel is instrumental, in that they remind me to write for the art. I think Anna's Nin, her diaries, very explicit, very sensual, full of lies, full of, and yes, I think she's among the top one. And then Alistair Gray, Ocean Vuong, just so many writers that, it's usually I go to them, or Fernando Pessoa, I go to them to remind myself that you can write, be yourself, and instead of trying to, cater to a certain taste.
I kind of laughed at Anais Nin because I read her in high school and college.
High school.
I don't know what to get out of this. The diaries in particular. That
yes.
About. All right, so it's been a fabulous conversation. Congratulations again. I want to bring back Travis, Katherina, and Isabel for a couple of just closing remarks. Travis and Katherina, what can we expect next from DVAN and the Texas Tech University Press series?
Absolutely. So we've got a couple of books that are already sort of slotted for publication. This fall, we're releasing a collection of short stories from Bao Ninh, which have been recently translated by Quan Man Ha and Cab Tran. And this collection is called Hanoi at Midnight, and we're hoping to have it out sometime this winter. And then also significant in the sort of lore of DVAN is we're putting out the 25th anniversary edition of Watermark, the anthology of Vietnamese-American literature, and that will be out in spring of 2023. So those are the next sort of big things that we have slotted in. Before I pass the torch, I wanted to just mention how much of a pleasure it was to edit Abbigail's work. This is sort of an experimental book, and that every section starts over again. And so editing it, if you switch one variable, you have to imagine of, well, do we need to cascade and change this in other sections? And it was such a fascinating and wonderful conversation. And so if you're interested in chewing on the ideas of stories as much as you are reading them, this is a great book. So thank you.
Thanks, Travis. Katherina, anything to add?
I'd like to add on like that. We are really honored to have Abbigail as our inaugural author for the imprints, and we are continuing to do submissions every year. We are also having a upcoming poetry winner to be announced later this year. And my hope is that the community will continue to like build and that authors will continue to support each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So publicize, everybody out there, publicize the series, get your friends to submit their manuscripts. I put the two references that Travis brought up in the comments, Boughton Inn and Watermark. I just want to emphasize how important this is. Watermark was this landmark anthology from, I believe, the mid-1990s, first Vietnamese-American literature in English anthology, published a bunch of writers who have since gone on to publish further books and so on. Has helped to inaugurate the field of Vietnamese-American literature. So we're just, absolutely thrilled to reprint it. And then Boughton Inn, author of The Sorrow of War, arguably the greatest war novel of the Vietnam War, and arguably one of the classic war novels of the world. I think The Sorrow of War is such an incredibly important novel, and so beautifully written. If beautiful is a word that can be used to describe a novel about trauma, atrocity, war, and melancholy. And after that, the novel was published in the late 1980s, I believe, and appeared in English in the early 1990s. And after that, Boughton Inn never published anything again for a variety of complicated reasons that we can only really speculate about. And so we at DVAN and Texas Tech University Press get to publish the next book by Boughton Inn. I think it's really a coup for us anyway. I don't know what Boughton Inn thinks about it, but it's a coup for us. And I can't wait to see that manuscript in print. So last words from our esteemed leader, Isabel Tweep. Hello.
Thank you. Yes, and talking about coup, I mean, one thing when Travis approached us, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So we put a call out for emerging Vietnamese-American writers, and we were blown away by receiving Abigail's work, Andrew Lamb's work, Boughton Inn's work, other work by established writers. And Abigail, when she said she felt safe working with us, I mean, it's just like, oh, we're doing something right. I mean, it's like, my heart is touched, right? Because that's the whole point of creating DVAN, right? Because in our research, my research is like, no, there is, Vietnamese-American writer is boxed in certain narrative, and we really want to fracture and change that box, right? So now we say but then it's not fair for emerging writers, so now we're going to publish both. We're going to have one series for emerging writers, right? And then we're going to have a special project for established writers, and then we're going to change by working together the Vietnamese-American landscape of literature and globally. This is what we are about. But again, now we have to raise money to make this happen, because this expense coming up, so people can help us out. But really, we mix it up as we go, and this is what's come, and we're going to respond to. So yeah, and I'm so delighted, and I love Abigail's book. I mean, it really inspired me as a writer, and the courage, right, to fight against everyone, just like you, Viet, right? Fight in every assumption, expectation of what does it mean to be here, Vietnamese-American woman writer, or Vietnamese writer, and American writers, and not writing against it, but just for yourself, the way you want it. And that, as you say, you represent the next generations of writers, and I really see that, and you're going to inspire a lot of people, Vietnamese-Americans, Americans, Europeans, everyone. So
thank you for that. And let's wrap up on a slightly different note, because Ash Mayfair, who I believe is related to Abbigail Rosewood and is a very talented movie director in their own right, has asked a question, and we should close with this. What is your favorite Vietnamese dish? To everyone, Ash says. We'll start with Katherina. What is your favorite Vietnamese dish?
I honestly like the Vietnamese udon, bánh canh.
Bánh canh, very good, very good. Extra points for dishes that are not pho, by the way, or bánh mì. Okay, Travis, what is your favorite Vietnamese dish?
I forget the name in Vietnamese, but it's the one that's the stew with the annatto seeds and the pork blood and all of the lemongrass broth. I forget what that one is. It's a celebration dish. It's not.
I know the answer, but do any of the other three panelists know the answer to Travis's question?
Bún bò Huế.
Bún bò
Yeah.
Huế, absolutely. Bún bò Huế.
Yes.
Very good. Ding, 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 ding. Extra points for Bún bò Huế, one of my favorites too. Isabel, what is your favorite Vietnamese dish?
The one that pops in my head is the crab with all the vegetables and shrimp at bánh xào, right? That's how you say it.
Bánh xèo.
Bánh
Bánh
xào.
xèo.
Yeah.
Bánh xèo, the Vietnamese omelet. Right.
Love it.
Well, I'm going to leave the last word to Abigail, but for my favorite Vietnamese dish, if I said thịt chó, I would probably get in trouble, right? If I said hot vit lon, I might get in trouble too. I just had hot vit lon actually last week at New Restaurant in Seattle. If you're in Seattle, highly recommend New, N-U-E, for nouveau Vietnamese food, and they have hot vit lon. If you don't know, then you don't know. And if you do, you do. Okay, favorite Vietnamese food that I can share with non-Vietnamese audiences that is not bún bò Huế or bánh mì, I would say is bún riêu, which is related to bún bò Huế. They're both Huế dishes, and they're both tomato-based, but bún riêu has crab, noodles, tomato-based pork broth. All right. Abbigail, congratulations again. Author of Constellations of Eve, soon to be returnee to Vietnam, where she will pursue, according to her essay in Time magazine, the Vietnamese dream. What is your favorite Vietnamese dish?
My mother's mắm ruốc, which is pork fat made with shrimp paste and eaten with slices of cucumbers. So when you said somebody doesn't like to cook, you might be insulting her, not me. I don't know if she's here right now, but
Well,
that was hilarious.
You don't cook. She may cook the mắm ruốc, but you don't cook.
I'm here.
All right. Okay. Mắm ruốc is on the scale of authentic Vietnamese food, just about as authentic as you can get, as far as I'm concerned. If you can eat mắm ruốc, you deserve Vietnamese citizenship. Okay. Congratulations to Abigail. Thank you so much to Travis and to Katherina for sharing the Texas Tech University Press and DVAN collaboration with us. Thank you to Isabel Tuipalo for her continually inspiring leadership. Thanks to all of you out there in the audience for being here. This is our last Accented show for the season. We'll be back in September with amazing guests. See you then, and keep on reading.